Disclaimer: this video contains discussions of real criminal cases and sensitive subject matter. It is created for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. It began as a frantic 911 call, a young woman's trembling voice echoing through the early morning darkness of Oak Beach, New York. She was terrified, disoriented, and kept repeating the words, "They're trying to kill me." Then silence. That was the last time anyone heard from Shannan Gilbert alive. Her disappearance would uncover one of America's most chilling mysteries, a series of bodies buried along a desolate stretch of Long Island beach, and expose questions that still haunt investigators today. What really happened to Shannan Gilbert? And what did the police miss? It was still dark when she made the call. Her voice trembled, caught between panic and disbelief. Somewhere in the quiet, gated community of Oak Beach, a young woman ran barefoot through the cold night, her breath sharp in the air, her words breaking apart through fear. "They're trying to kill me." Then silence. That was the last anyone heard from Shannan Gilbert. Hours later, police arrived. The streets were calm again. The neighbors had gone back inside. But Shannan, the woman who had begged for help, who had run for her life, was gone. For months, her mother would search for her, haunted by that final phone call. She would call the police, organize search teams, and retrace every possible step her daughter might have taken that night. And then, when the police finally began searching, they didn't find Shannan. They found something else, a body, then another, and another, all buried along a lonely stretch of Long Island's Gilgo beach, all women, all sex workers, all missing. What began as one woman's desperate search for her daughter would unravel into one of the most chilling serial murder investigations in American history. But through it all, the question that lingered, the one that no one could silence, was this: what really happened to Shannan Gilbert? And what did the police miss? The story of Shannan Gilbert is not just about one disappearance. It's about a system that didn't listen, an investigation that overlooked vital evidence, and a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten. To understand the truth, we have to go back to the night it all began, May 1st, 2010, in Oak Beach, New York. Shannan was a 24-year-old woman trying to build a better life. She had dreams of becoming a singer, of moving to the city, of leaving behind the struggles that had defined her early years. But like so many young women trying to survive, she had turned to sex work to make ends meet. That night, she went to meet a client she'd arranged through Craigslist. It was supposed to be a quick job. She would be home before sunrise, but something went wrong, something that sent her into a full-blown panic. Sometime after 4:45 a.m., she made a 23-minute call to 911, her voice trembling with fear. She told the dispatcher someone was after her. She was seen running through the streets, barefoot, terrified, pounding on doors, begging strangers for help. Neighbors described her as frantic and terrified, and then just like that she vanished. When police finally arrived, they didn't search the marsh, they didn't bring in dogs, they didn't even treat her case as urgent. Instead, they assumed she had run off, perhaps under the influence, perhaps in distress, but not in danger. They were wrong. For 7 long months, Shannan's family searched without answers. Her mother, Mary Gilbert, refused to give up. She pleaded with police to take her daughter's case seriously, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Then, in December 2010, a K-9 officer training his dog stumbled across human remains near Gilgo Beach, just a few miles from where Shannan had vanished. It wasn't Shannan. It was Melissa Bartholomew, another young woman who had also been working as an escort and had gone missing the previous year. And as police began to dig deeper both literally and figuratively, they made a horrifying discovery. 3 more bodies, all women, all sex workers who had disappeared within the same 2-year period, each one wrapped in burlap, each one carefully placed in the same stretch of sand near Ocean Parkway. The police called them the Gilgo 4. The world began calling their killer the Long Island serial killer, but amid the chaos of that breaking story, one name was still missing from every headline: Shannan Gilbert. For months, investigators insisted her case was separate. They claimed her disappearance didn't fit the serial killer's pattern. They said she might have had a psychotic episode, that she'd run into the marsh and drowned. They had no evidence of foul play, but her mother didn't believe it, not for a second. Mary Gilbert knew her daughter's final words. She knew the fear in her voice. She knew something or someone had been chasing Shannan that night. And she was right, because a year and a half later, in December 2011, police searching the same area found Shannan's belongings scattered across the marsh: her jeans, her purse, her phone, and then, finally, her skeletal remains. The discovery should have brought closure, but instead it raised even more questions. Police ruled her death an accident. They said she likely became disoriented, wandered into the swamp, and drowned. But the evidence told another story. Her body was found face down in shallow water only a few inches deep. Her clothes were torn. Her phone and shoes were found far from her remains, as if she had been pursued. And an independent autopsy conducted by Dr. Michael Baden, one of the nation's leading forensic pathologists, revealed damage to her hyoid bone, the small bone in the neck that often fractures in cases of manual strangulation. Dr. Baden's findings suggested that Shannan may have been murdered. Her mother was devastated but not surprised. She had been saying it all along, that Shannan's case was part of something much bigger, something far darker than anyone wanted to admit. And perhaps the most haunting part, if police had listened that night, if they had taken her 911 call seriously, maybe she could have been found alive. But the truth about what happened in that marsh was buried under bureaucracy, negligence, and bias. Shannan's occupation made it easier for police to dismiss her case. She wasn't seen as a typical victim, and because of that, her disappearance didn't get the urgency it deserved. When the 911 call was finally released more than a decade later, in 2022, the world finally heard what Shannan had said in her final moments. She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't incoherent. She was running for her life. Her words were chillingly clear: "They're after me. Please help me." But the help never came. Shannan Gilbert's disappearance didn't just reveal the truth about her own fate, it exposed a network of corruption, indifference, and horror buried along Long Island's beaches. Her story forced open the case of the Gilgo beach murders, leading to the discovery of more than 10 sets of remains, some dating back years. It became one of the most complex serial murder investigations in modern history. And though the arrest of Rex Heuermann in 2023 finally gave a name and face to the alleged Long Island serial killer, the mystery of Shannan Gilbert still stands apart, suspended between accident and murder, between closure and conspiracy. Police say she drowned, her family says she was killed, and in the middle lies the truth, a truth that may never be fully uncovered. But what we do know is this: if it weren't for Shannan's disappearance, those other victims might never have been found. Without her, the world might never have discovered what was buried beneath the sands of Gilgo Beach. Shannan's story is one of tragedy, injustice, and perseverance, not just because of how she died, but because of what her case revealed. She was dismissed ignored, and forgotten by the very people sworn to protect her. Yet, through her mother's relentless fight, she became the spark that ignited one of the biggest criminal investigations in New York history. And even now, her voice captured in that haunting 911 call continues to echo through the years, reminding us of what was lost that night and what was missed. The truth about Shannan Gilbert may never be fully known, but one thing is certain: her story forced the world to listen. Her cry for help was the sound that led the world to uncover a killer, and yet for her that help came too late. The discovery of Shannan Gilbert's body should have been the end of the story, but instead it became the beginning of a deeper mystery. Even after her remains were recovered, nothing about the case made sense. The official story didn't match the evidence, and the people closest to her refused to believe what they were being told. Authorities concluded that Shannan had simply run into the marsh during a mental episode and drowned. But her family, her attorney, and independent forensic experts all saw a different picture, one that pointed toward foul play, and perhaps even a cover-up. For starters, there were too many inconsistencies in how Shannan's remains were found. Her jeans, purse, and cell phone were discovered first not near her body, but hundreds of feet away, scattered across the marsh like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. Her shoes were in a completely different spot. Her body was found face down, half submerged in shallow water barely deep enough to drown in, and while police claimed there was no sign of trauma, the independent autopsy told a different story: damage to the hyoid bone, something commonly seen in strangulation cases. Her family's private pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, said the fracture was consistent with homicidal violence. He couldn't prove murder, but he couldn't rule it out either. And yet, despite all that, police held firm no crime had occurred. The question everyone began to ask was simple: why were they so eager to close the case? The truth is, the handling of Shannan Gilbert's case exposed deep flaws within the Suffolk County Police Department, flaws that went far beyond one investigation. From the very beginning, Shannan's disappearance was mishandled. When her 911 call came in, officers didn't respond with urgency. They took nearly 45 minutes to arrive, and even then, they didn't launch an extensive search. When neighbors told police that a frightened woman had been knocking on doors and begging for help, they didn't secure the area. They didn't call for helicopters or search dogs. They just assumed she had left. And when Shannan's family begged them to keep searching, police dismissed them, saying she was probably on drugs or had run off. That decision, that failure to take her seriously, may have cost Shannan her life. Worse still, in the months that followed, police would actively resist linking her case to the growing list of bodies found nearby. They called her death an accident while investigating what was clearly a serial killer's burial ground. To this day, many believe that denial was deliberate, an attempt to keep the department from admitting how much they missed, how much they ignored, and how much they got wrong. By the time Shannan's remains were discovered, police had already uncovered the bodies of at least 10 other people along the same stretch of Long Island's South Shore from Gilgo Beach to Oak Beach and beyond. The first 4, Melissa Barthélemy, Maureen Brainard, Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, were all found wrapped in burlap, buried close together. Their disappearances fit a clear pattern. All were escorts, all had advertised online, and all had vanished after meeting clients. Shannan's disappearance didn't match perfectly, but the similarities were impossible to ignore. She too was an escort. She too vanished near the same isolated area, and it was her disappearance that led police to the other victims in the first place. Had police treated her case as criminal from the start, they might have found those women sooner. Instead, it took 7 months and a chance discovery to reveal what had been hidden for years. That single fact that a young woman's desperate plea for help led to the exposure of a serial killer's dumping ground became one of the most haunting coincidences in American criminal history. But was it coincidence or connection? For more than a decade, the public never heard Shannan Gilbert's 911 call. Police said releasing it could compromise the investigation. But Shannan's mother, Mary Gilbert, believed otherwise. She fought tirelessly to have it released, convinced it contained proof that her daughter had been attacked. Finally, in 2022, the audio was made public. The 23-minute recording was chilling. It captured a terrified young woman pleading for help, saying over and over that someone was after her. There was confusion, panic, and the unmistakable sound of running, then silence. It wasn't the voice of someone hallucinating or disoriented. It was the voice of someone being hunted. That call shattered the official version of events. It proved Shannan wasn't suffering from paranoia. She was reacting to something real. The question that remained was who she was running from. For years, police had no clear suspect. Theories swirled. Some believed the killer was a former cop. Others thought it was a local resident, possibly someone who lived in Oak Beach, someone who knew the secluded terrain well enough to use it as a burial site without being seen. Then, in July 2023, investigators made a breakthrough. They arrested Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect living just 18 miles from Gilgo Beach. Through DNA evidence, hair analysis, and cell phone data, Heuermann was linked to 3 of the Gilgo 4 victims. He was meticulous. He used burner phones to contact escorts. He searched for violent pornography. He even conducted detailed online research about the investigation, as if tracking his own crimes. When police raided his home, they found over 200 weapons and evidence suggesting years of predatory behavior. Heuermann's arrest brought long-awaited relief to many families, but for Shannan's relatives, it only reopened old wounds. Because once again, police insisted her case wasn't connected. Despite their confidence, the truth is far from clear. Many of the same investigators who dismissed Shannan's case in 2010 were the ones making those statements in 2023. And while Heuermann has been tied to several victims, the full number of women buried along that coastline and how long the killings spanned remains uncertain. It's entirely possible there were multiple killers or that Heuermann's crimes overlapped with others. Forensic experts have pointed out that Shannan's case shares critical similarities with the others, from her occupation to her last known location to the method of disposal. And yet, she's been labeled separate. Her death officially ruled an accident, her final words written off as hysteria. But if that's true, if Shannan wasn't a victim of the Long Island serial killer, then we have to ask the most chilling question of all. Who was she running from that night? No one fought harder for the truth than Mary Gilbert, Shannan's mother. She challenged police, hired private investigators, and appeared on national television demanding accountability. She refused to accept the official narrative, even when it meant standing alone. Her strength became the backbone of the case, the reason the world didn't forget Shannan's name. But Mary's story ended in tragedy too. In 2016, she was killed by one of her other daughters during a mental health crisis, an unimaginable loss that left the Gilbert family shattered once again. Even in death, Mary's fight lives on. Her efforts forced the release of key evidence, inspired documentaries, and helped shift public perception. She made sure her daughter's story would never be buried like the others. Today, the mystery of Shannan Gilbert remains unsolved. Was she a victim of the same killer who terrorized Long Island for years? Or did she encounter a different predator, one who vanished the night she did? No one knows for sure. But what's undeniable is that her disappearance exposed something monstrous, not just in one man, but in an entire system that failed to protect women like her. If police had listened that night, if they had treated her 911 call as urgent, if they had believed her, perhaps Shannan Gilbert would be alive today. The tragedy of her story lies not only in how she died, but in how she was ignored. She was dismissed as unstable, judged by her profession, and written off as another escort. But in the end, it was her case that revealed a serial killer's hunting ground, her voice, that led investigators to the truth they refused to see. The Shannan Gilbert Mystery remains a haunting reminder that sometimes the most important clues are the ones ignored in plain sight. Her final words still echo through the night. "They're trying to kill me." And maybe, just maybe, she was right all along. By the time investigators finished searching the lonely stretch of Long Island shoreline, more than a dozen sets of human remains had been found. The sands of Gilgo Beach had become a graveyard, a silent archive of lives cut short, each one carrying a name, a face, and a story that had been overlooked for far too long. But among those names, Shannan Gilbert's stood apart. Her disappearance wasn't just another case. It was the spark that ignited the entire investigation. Without her desperate 911 call, police might never have discovered the other victims at all. And yet, in a painful twist of irony, the very woman who revealed the serial killings is the one the system refuses to acknowledge as a victim. As the investigation dragged on, something darker began to surface, a trail of corruption and internal scandal within the Suffolk County Police Department itself. In 2015, the department's then police chief, James Burke, was arrested and later sentenced to prison for assaulting a suspect and covering up his own crimes. It was soon revealed that during Burke's tenure, the Gilgo Beach investigation had been deliberately restricted, with federal agencies kept at a distance. Why would a police chief block outside help in one of the most significant serial murder cases in American history? Some investigators have suggested Burke feared the FBI might uncover his own misconduct, including alleged ties to sex workers and drug use, and that he wanted to keep the spotlight off himself and the department. If that's true, then the Gilgo Beach murders were not only the work of a killer, they were a mirror reflecting the failures of an entire system, and Shannan Gilbert's death was caught in the middle of it. The evidence surrounding Shannan's final hours is filled with red flags that investigators overlooked or dismissed. A terrified woman repeatedly begged for help over a span of 23 minutes. She gave her location. She named her fear, yet police failed to trace the call effectively or mount a timely search. Multiple Oak Beach residents reported seeing Shannan running, screaming, and knocking on doors. Some said she was being followed by a man. But those accounts were brushed aside. Her clothes and belongings were scattered inconsistently across the marsh. Her body's position didn't match the theory of drowning, and her hyoid bone fractured was never properly explained. The 911 tape, key evidence logs, and investigative files were withheld from the public and from the family for over a decade. Only through media pressure and lawsuits did fragments of truth begin to emerge. Each of these missed opportunities could have reshaped the case. Each was an open door that police chose to close. And as the years passed, the silence surrounding Shannan's death grew heavier until the 2023 arrest of Rex Heuermann brought it back into the light. When news broke that Rex Heuermann, a married architect and father, had been charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4, the public was stunned. He looked ordinary, a man who blended into suburban life, who commuted to Manhattan every day, who lived just miles from where the bodies were buried. The evidence against him was damning. Cell tower records placed his phone near the victim's last known locations. Burner phones used to contact the women were traced back to him. DNA recovered from hair found on the burlap matched his family's genetic profile. Police also found disturbing internet searches, thousands of violent images, and a list of escort names and phone numbers hidden on his computer. The case against him was solid, and yet still they claimed Shannan Gilbert wasn't connected. To her family, that claim defied logic. Her disappearance had led to the discovery of Huerman's victims. She worked in the same industry, vanished from the same geographic area, and was last seen under circumstances of fear and pursuit. But the official stance was unchanged: accidental death. Even after her death, Shannan's family refused to let her case be forgotten. Her mother, Mary Gilbert, became a fierce advocate for victims' rights, demanding the release of police files and pushing for reforms in how law enforcement handles missing persons cases, especially those involving sex workers. Mary's persistence forced authorities to reopen parts of the investigation and release Shannan's 911 recording. She became a voice for families who had been ignored and marginalized. Her advocacy drew national attention. Documentaries, news specials, and books all chronicled her struggle for truth. But tragedy struck again when Mary herself was murdered in 2016 by her younger daughter, Sarah, during a psychotic episode. The loss devastated the family but strengthened their resolve. To this day, Shannan's sister Gilbert continues the fight, using every media platform available to remind the world that her sister's story remains unresolved. The Gilbert family's relentless pursuit of justice became a symbol of what happens when the system fails, and when ordinary people must do the work that police should have done long ago. As the years passed, more victims were identified along the same coastal strip. Some had been missing for over a decade. Others were found in dismembered states. Their remains spread across different locations, all within reach of the same marshland where Shannan's body was found. Police have confirmed at least 11 sets of remains, though some believe there are more. Not all are believed to be connected to Rex Huerman, and that uncertainty only deepens the mystery. How many killers were operating on Long Island? Was the Gilgo Beach murderer just one man, or was the area being used as a dumping ground by multiple predators over the years? The answers remain elusive. But every clue, every trail, every haunting discovery, all of it leads back to the same origin point: the night Shannan Gilbert disappeared. Over time, investigators, journalists, and online sleuths have developed their own theories about what really happened to Shannan. Some believe she encountered Rex Huerman himself, that he chased her through Oak Beach after an encounter went wrong. Others think she may have been attacked by a different man, possibly a client or neighbor from that night, who panicked and covered his tracks. A smaller group believes she was caught in something bigger, a network of exploitation, where multiple men in the area preyed on vulnerable women, protected by local corruption and silence. And then there's the official version that she ran into the marsh, hallucinating, and drowned. But as forensic experts point out, people don't simply wander half a mile into a cold, muddy swamp and collapse face down in 6 inches of water unless something or someone is forcing them there. The more you study the evidence, the harder it becomes to believe the official story. Despite everything, the lies, the delays, the indifference, Shannan Gilbert's voice continues to echo through history. Her 911 call has become one of the most haunting pieces of audio in modern crime. It's not just the words she said, it's the terror in her voice. It's the raw, instinctive fear that no one can fake. That fear was real, and it tells us something terrible happened to her. The tragedy of the Shannan Gilbert Mystery is that we may never know the full truth. But what we do know is that her case changed everything, forcing the public to see how easily certain lives are dismissed, and how much damage that indifference can cause. Because of her, the Gilgo Beach victims were found. Because of her, the investigation reopened, and because of her, law enforcement across America has been forced to rethink how they handle missing persons cases involving sex workers. Her death was not in vain, but her story is still unfinished. More than a decade has passed since that cold night in Oak Beach, yet the questions remain. Why was her 911 call ignored? Why did police insist her death was accidental? And most haunting of all, what really happened in those final moments, when her voice faded into silence? Shannan Gilbert may never get the justice she deserves, but her legacy lives on in every investigation that now looks deeper, in every victim who is now taken seriously, in every mother who refuses to stop searching for her missing child. Her story is a warning, a cry from the marshes that still echoes through the dark. Don't look away, don't dismiss fear, don't forget the loss, because sometimes the truth hides not in the evidence that's found, but in the evidence the world refuses to see. In the years since Shannan Gilbert's death, her story has come to represent more than a single tragedy. It has become a mirror reflecting the deep cracks in the justice system, a story about neglect, prejudice, and the danger of ignoring a voice crying out for help. But beyond the headlines, beyond the case files, there's a deeper emotional truth. A young woman's life ended in fear, and those who could have saved her didn't. What police missed that night wasn't just evidence, it was empathy. It was humanity. And in the aftermath, their mistakes would echo through one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. From the moment Shannan dialed 911, every decision that followed seemed to move her further from safety. Her location was clear enough for dispatchers to triangulate. She was audibly terrified. She begged for help. But dispatchers and responding officers treated her call as confusion rather than crisis. When they arrived at Oak Beach, they didn't set up a perimeter or deploy helicopters. They didn't treat it as an abduction or a potential homicide, just another distressed call. They left, and Shannan was gone. By the time officers returned hours later, her trail was cold. The marshlands stretched endlessly in every direction, and the tide had already begun to rise. That night was their chance, and they missed it. Shannan's story exposes something deeply uncomfortable about how society and law enforcement often categorize victims. Because she was a sex worker, her disappearance was seen as less urgent, her life somehow less valuable. It's a quiet bias, one that shapes decisions without ever being said aloud. A bias that says some victims are worth saving and others are not. In the early press releases, police referred to her as unstable, on drugs, and possibly schizophrenic. They painted her as erratic rather than endangered. Those labels justified their inaction, allowing them to walk away while a terrified young woman was fighting for her life. What they didn't realize was that by dismissing her, they were also dismissing every woman who vanished before her. Had Shannan's case been treated with urgency from the start, the Gilgo Beach murders might have been uncovered months, maybe even years earlier. Instead, the killer kept hunting. The deeper you look into Shannan's case, the clearer it becomes that her death and the deaths of so many others were not just the result of one man's violence, but of a system's indifference. Investigators had reports of missing women dating back to 1996. Patterns were visible. Victims shared the same backgrounds, the same professions, the same online meeting methods. But without public pressure, these disappearances were quietly filed away, one after another. It took Shannan Gilbert's mother, Mary, a single, grieving parent, to do what an entire police department would not: connect the dots. She organized searches. She called the media. She kept asking the question no one wanted to answer: why are so many women disappearing in the same place? When police finally listened, it wasn't because they suddenly cared. It was because Mary Gilbert refused to stop making noise. And when the truth finally began to emerge, when those bodies started to surface, the public began to see how much had been hidden beneath years of apathy. For all the attention the Gilgo Beach murders have received, it's easy to forget who Shannan Gilbert really was. Before she was a name in a police report, she was a daughter who used to sing around the house, a young woman who dreamed of becoming a performer, someone who wanted more out of life than struggle and survival. She wasn't perfect, but she was human, and that's what makes her story so devastating. She didn't die because she made bad choices. She died because, when she needed help most, the world decided her life was expendable. When her mother first heard that 911 tape years later, she said it broke her heart all over again. Shannan's voice wasn't confused or incoherent. It was crystal clear, a young woman pleading to be believed. Every scream, every breath, every word was evidence that she was running from danger, and still it wasn't enough to convince the people who mattered most. The investigation into the Long Island serial killer has since evolved, revealing far more than anyone expected. DNA, cell tower mapping, and witness timelines eventually led police to Rex Heuermann, but the arrest came 13 years too late for the women he is accused of killing and for Shannan. Even now, the official narrative separates her from the others, as if her story exists in a different category. But that separation only highlights what she truly symbolizes, the turning point. Without Shannan, the Gilgo Beach victims might still be buried. Without her mother, their names might still be forgotten. Her case forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about who we listen to, who we dismiss, and how many cries for help go unheard simply because of who's speaking them. Though Mary Gilbert's life ended tragically, her work changed everything. Her persistence forced the release of Shannan's 911 call, exposed failures in law enforcement, and gave visibility to the victims society had ignored. Mary became a symbol of unrelenting advocacy, proof that even one voice, armed with grief and determination, can challenge an entire system. Today, her surviving daughters continue that mission. They speak publicly, work with advocacy organizations, and ensure that both Shannan and Mary's stories remain part of the ongoing fight for justice. The Gilberts turned pain into purpose, and in doing so, made sure that what happened to Shannan would never be forgotten. More than a decade later, the question of what really happened that night still haunts Oak Beach. Was Shannan being chased by a client? Did she stumble into the path of a serial killer? Or was she silenced by someone who knew she had seen too much? Each theory adds a new layer to the puzzle, but none erase the fact that her death could have been prevented. And that's the truth that lingers, the truth that cuts deeper than any single answer ever could. Because in the end, it wasn't just a killer who failed Shannan Gilbert. It was the entire system. They missed her fear. They missed her humanity. They missed their chance to save her, and in doing so, they allowed a monster to keep hunting in the shadows. If they had believed her, if they had searched sooner, if they had looked beyond their assumptions, then perhaps Shannan Gilbert's story would have been one of survival instead of tragedy. But even in death, she left behind something powerful, a legacy that continues to expose, to challenge, and to demand change. Shannan Gilbert's voice may have been silenced that night in Oak Beach, but the echoes of her final words, "They're trying to kill me," still reverberate through every investigation, every reform, and every effort to make sure no one is ever ignored again. Shannan Maria Gilbert was 24 years old. She loved to sing. She had dreams of performing, of finding her place in the world. She was more than the headlines. She was more than a victim. Her disappearance opened the door to one of the most significant serial murder cases in modern American history, and her mother's fight for justice changed how the world sees victims like her. This story will forever stand as a reminder that behind every unsolved mystery lies a human being who deserved better, and that the cost of indifference is measured not in statistics, but in lives. May Shannan and her mother, Mary Gilbert, rest in peace. And may their courage continue to light the path toward the truth. The marsh where Shannan Gilbert's body was found is quiet now. The reeds whisper in the wind, the tide moves in slow rhythm, and the world passes by unaware that this place once held the key to a mystery that shook the entire country. But for those who remember, the silence of Oak Beach isn't peaceful. It's haunting because it reminds us of everything that went wrong and everything that could have been prevented. When Shannan's remains were discovered, Suffolk County Police were quick to close the book on her death. They called it an unfortunate accident, claiming she had suffered a breakdown, fled into the marsh, and drowned, but that conclusion only deepened the divide between law enforcement and the people who had fought so hard to find her. Her family refused to accept it. Her lawyer called it a rush to judgment, and the public began asking the question. Police seemed desperate to avoid what were they hiding. The truth, as time revealed, wasn't simple. The deeper journalists, private investigators, and families dug, the clearer it became that the entire investigation was plagued by bias, corruption, and a chilling lack of accountability. The Suffolk County Police Department's credibility was already cracking when the Gilgo Beach case broke open. Internal scandals and misconduct were festering behind the scenes, none more shocking than the downfall of Chief James Burke, the very man who oversaw the early years of the investigation. Burke was later convicted of assault and obstruction of justice for beating a man who had stolen items from his police vehicle and then covering it up. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Reports soon surfaced suggesting Burke had deliberately blocked the FBI from assisting with the Gilgo Beach investigation during his tenure. To this day, many believe he did it to protect himself, that he feared federal scrutiny might expose his own illegal activities and connections to sex workers. If that's true, then the corruption inside the department didn't just derail the investigation, it allowed a serial killer to remain free for years longer than he should have. And at the heart of it all was Shannan Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance exposed the rot. Shannan's story became the rallying point for families who had lost loved ones under similar circumstances. For too long, missing sex workers had been ignored, their disappearances buried in forgotten case files. But now, thanks to Shannan's mother, Mary Gilbert, and other advocates, the world was forced to pay attention. Documentaries, podcasts, and national news coverage began to question everything from the police's conduct to the timeline of the murders. What once seemed like a local tragedy became a national conversation about how law enforcement treats victims from marginalized backgrounds. Mary's voice became that of every grieving mother who had been dismissed by those in power. In one interview, she said, "If my daughter had been a lawyer or a nurse, the police would have been out there that same night with helicopters and dogs." That statement resonated with millions. Her words weren't just about Shannan, they were about every woman whose story was silenced because of who she was, where she came from, or what she did to survive. When Rex Heuermann was arrested in 2023, the public finally saw the face of the man allegedly responsible for at least 3 of the Gilgo 4 murders. The evidence against him was staggering DNA, digital footprints, cell tower records, and physical links tying him to the victim. But for the Gilbert family, the arrest brought no closure. Authorities continued to claim that Shannan's death wasn't connected to Huerman or the other victims, that it was purely coincidence. Her disappearance led to the discovery of the serial killer's dumping ground. Yet the timeline, geography, and eerie similarities between the cases are impossible to ignore. All the victims were women, all were escorts, all vanished within a small radius of the same coastal highway. If Shannan hadn't vanished when she did, those other women might never have been found. So even if her killer wasn't Rex Huerman, her story remains inseparable from his crimes. She was the spark that lit the investigation, the first domino in a long line of tragedies finally brought into the light. At its core, the Shannan Gilbert case isn't just a mystery, it's a lesson in what happens when fear, prejudice, and arrogance intersect. Police didn't just miss clues, they missed chances to save lives, they missed the truth staring them in the face. Forensic experts later revealed that Shannan's body showed signs inconsistent with drowning. Her torn clothing and scattered belongings suggested a struggle, and the location of her remains deep in the marsh, far from the road, indicated she hadn't simply wandered off. But despite this, no one was held accountable. No disciplinary actions were taken. The department doubled down on their theory, and the family's cries for justice were met with bureaucratic silence. It wasn't just one woman the police failed, it was an entire community. Shannan's mother, Mary, didn't live to see the arrest of Rex Huerman. Her death in 2016 was as heartbreaking as it was symbolic, a tragedy within a tragedy. Yet her legacy endures through her daughters, her advocacy, and the undeniable truth she left behind, that a mother's determination can shake an entire system. The Gilbert's story has since been immortalized in books, documentaries, and even film, including Netflix's Lost Girls, which brought Shannan's case to millions around the world. But beyond the media, what truly matters is what her story changed. It forced public agencies to reevaluate how they classify and prioritize missing persons cases. It opened conversations about bias against sex workers and victims from disadvantaged backgrounds. It reminded the world that justice cannot depend on status or reputation, because every life, every voice deserves to be heard. As of today, the question of what really happened to Shannan Gilbert remains unanswered. Did she stumble into the path of a killer? Was she chased through the marsh by someone she feared? Or did the truth die with her that night, lost forever in the darkness of Oak Beach? Each possibility carries its own horror. But what haunts most people isn't how she died, it's how her cries were ignored. That 23:9:111 call stands as a chilling symbol of every missed opportunity, every ignored victim, and every failure to act when it mattered most. It's the sound of a system looking the other way. More than a decade later, Shannan's voice continues to echo not just through that recording, but through the voices of everyone fighting to prevent another tragedy like hers. Her story changed laws, changed awareness, and changed lives. It proved that even when the truth is buried, even when the powerful try to silence it, persistence can bring it to light. Because of Shannan, the world knows the name Gilgo Beach. Because of her mother, the truth could not be buried forever. And because of their courage, victims once dismissed now have voices that cannot be ignored. In the end, Shannan Gilbert's mystery is not just about death, it's about the cost of indifference. It's about the people society forgets until it's too late. It's about the voices we silence when we choose not to listen. The marsh where she died will always carry that silence, the echo of her final words, the sound of a life cut short, and the reminder of what happens when compassion fails. But her story will never fade, because even in death, Shannan Gilbert forced the world to listen, and now her name stands as both a warning and a legacy, a testament to the truth that was ignored, and the justice that must still be found.